afternoon. Today's recording is going to cover one of many in the OpenShift 4.7 and F5 Container Ingress Services series. And so this is the first, like I said, user guide that I'm going to publish. And this user guide is really focused on two things. First, the user guide is focused on integration between OpenShift 4.7, that's OpenShift's latest release of your OCP instance, your OpenShift container platform. In this case, it's a standalone BIG-IP. As you can see in the diagram, we really have one standalone BIG-IP. And this is great for lab environment to try and get this up and running pretty quickly, and to try and get comfortable with the environment for the configuration. Perfect for dev stage, and then maybe moving to prod, there'll be high availability. The other thing that's really key here is using the OpenShift SDN. This is the default CNI that is shipping with 4.7. Now there's lots of changes in this space. OpenShift is moving to OVN Kubernetes, and I understand that. And there will be more videos coming in the up and coming weeks that talks a lot about either the migration from OpenShift SDN with BIG-IP to potentially a vanilla blank basic install of just using OVN Kubernetes. So before I get there, I want to go through the fundamentals. I want to go through the basics of using what we have today and kind of what's validated with the latest CIS 2.5, which is going to be released next week. Also, before I get to OVN Kubernetes with OpenShift, I want to document also the high availability configuration. So that's going to come next. In any case, let's focus back on today's demonstration with using standalone BIG-IP with OpenShift 4.7. What you're going to see in this user guide is pretty much everything you would need to do to recreate what I've provided you in this demo. So I pretty much have the structure up here. Here's the README. There's the CIS configuration, the demo app, the diagrams, etc., all the routes, etc. So you can pull that. You can clone this repo and you can pull everything in. What's really cool here is I'm using OpenShift 4.7 on VMware using this IPI or installer provisioned infrastructure. And so let's talk a little bit about that for a minute. So to configure OpenShift 4.7, you can configure in many different places. In my example, I'm using my personal lab, and in this case, I am using the installer provisioned infrastructure, which will create a default 3 master node, 3 worker node cluster in my VMware data center, or in my VMware cluster with the associated hardware or Dell server that I have in this environment. So this OpenShift installation is running on VMware using installer provisioned infrastructure. If you just click here, you can download your installer that you wanted to use. I was using Linux. You can do the pull secrets, and then you can download the other information that you need. To be honest, it was really simple, the installer. And there is a great link on how to install OpenShift 4.7 installer provision infrastructure from another YouTuber that if you wanted to do that, just do a search and you will find it. And that's exactly who I followed, and it was really pretty clear actually, and pretty simple to do that. So I'd highly recommend if you wanted to do that, just follow that guide. As I said, this is a preview of CIS 2.5. CIS 2.5, we're doing the verification of OpenShift 4.7. And so that is going to be released in the middle of July. Other than that, you can use a pre-version if you want, or just wait for that release to come out. I'm using AS3 version 3.28, and this is an installation with one of the latest versions of BIG-IP, BIG-IP 16.x. It really doesn't matter. We're using AS3, so as long as you're using a later version of BIG-IP, that's fine. What is important here is that we're using OpenShift SDN, so that you need to make sure that you have the either SDN license or is rolled into BEST, specifically with version 16, because we are creating a VXLAN tunnel between BIG-IP, because BIG-IP is part of the CNI, and we're using cluster mode, so BIG-IP can communicate directly with the pods. So the first thing that we have to do here is that we have to create our VXLAN tunnel. Now, this is going to change quite significantly with OVN Kubernetes, but as of now, to create the tunnel is pretty simple. Create the tunnel profile, and in my case, I'm using VXLAN MP, which sets the port, and that is the specific port for VXLAN. So if I log into BIG-IP and go down to network, take a look at the tunnels, and then if I go down to the profile, here's the profile that I'm using. In this case, it's VXLAN. I just created one called VXLAN MP because it was created before. I like it, but this is the configuration here. I am using the default port of 4789. Make sure that if you have a firewall, make sure that UDP is open bidirectional, right? It's got to be open bidirectional. BIG-IP has to basically reach out across the tunnel, and the same thing with OpenShift, has to also be able to reach out back and forth between the pods and the BIG-IP. So that's really common. A lot of organizations don't open the firewall between the Kubernetes cluster or the OpenShift cluster and the BIG-IP. It will cause a problem. And so once you've created your tunnel, now what you can do is you can actually go ahead and create the tunnel. And so this tunnel is important. I'm giving this tunnel a profile name of OpenShift_VXLAN. What you do here is you use your local address of your BIG-IP. So this is the BIG-IP I'm connecting to. This happens to be one of the self IPs. And here is the tunnel profile name. And so if we go back and look on BIG-IP, and we'll go down to the tunnel profile name, you can see there's the tunnel. Now, once everything is connected, here's what's interesting. You're going to see these forward database entries. These are what they call FDB entries as part of think of these as part of the VXLAN configuration. This is how it knows what nodes are part of the VXLAN, if you want to call it, network. And these entries are populated by CIS. So CIS is learning these entries from Flannel through OpenShift SDN and updating BIG-IP across an API. And this is outside of AS3, so AS3 doesn't cover this networking construct, but this is outside of AS3. We use a Python-based API. CIS will update BIG-IP and populate these nodes. So if you add a new node, or if you add multiple nodes, the FDBs will be updated, and these will be continuously updated approximately every 30 seconds or something like that. There is a timer. And so that's really important. So if you're troubleshooting, you don't see your FDB entries, then you notice that CIS cannot contact BIG-IP, or CIS is not getting this information. So that's why it's really important to get this tunnel right. And so the third piece that you have to create here is something called a host subnet. This goes away with OVN Kubernetes. You create this host subnet. It's almost like a dummy node or a dummy host, so that the BIG-IP here, which is called the F5 server, it's just a name. This F5 server is now part of the CNI. It's part of the OpenShift network. And so this is how it's able to route. Here's what's really important. This is the host IP address. This is the host IP, so it's similar to the actual master and worker node clusters. But what's really important here is that this is the subnet that it was given. So you need to create a self IP on BIG-IP so that it can participate in that subnet. But this is the difference between the pod subnet and the CIDR, or the CIDR, or the Flannel subnet. And so this is quite confusing. If you look at it, one is actually a specific pod subnet that you're given, which is really the /23, and then the host subnet, which is, in this case, I'm using a /24. That's a little confusing. It's Flannel. You can see this if you start digging into the Flannel configuration. If you have any questions, you can dig down deep into Flannel. But my recommendation is create a self IP, use /14, and then just create a self IP. In my case here, I use at 60, which is the same as this 60 here, just to kind of keep it simple. And if you go and take a look on the BIG-IP, you can see there's the self IP that references this tunnel VLAN or this tunnel VXLAN information here. Allow all. In this case, it's standalone, so I don't have to worry about floats and all that kind of stuff. That'll come later. So that is honestly the crux of the complexity, I think, when it comes to the OpenShift connectivity with the flannel CNI in this case. And you can see that that's created. Other thing that you want to do is you want to create an OpenShift partition on BIG-IP so that you can create all your so that CIS can communicate with that specific partition. And it wouldn't be common in this case. It would be something like, in my case, OpenShift. So once you've configured your networking stack, you're actually now ready to configure CIS. So in this case, we're going to be using the operator, right? Since it ships with the BIG-IP, since it ships with OpenShift and it's integrated into OpenShift already, we're going to use the operator. So to do this, we can log into our OpenShift instance. We can go to our operators. We can install the operator. To do this, just look up F5. You can install the operator here. Do this. You can see I already have one installed, so I won't need to reinstall it, but you can follow this process. I also have another link into how to install the operator, and I'll put that in the description as well. I can close this out. So I already have one instance created here. So you can see here's the instance of the operator. I created that instance. You can see it. Let's just go to all projects. Let me just go install the operator. Let me just go to all projects so that I can see it. Here is the operator. And here is the instance. So here's the instance that I created called F5 server. So this is the instance that I created for CIS. So let's go through this a little bit. You can see there I searched. There I installed the operator, and you can kind of go through. I did the automatic. I just used all namespaces. In this case, it doesn't matter where my services and deployment are. I didn't do namespace isolation. I'm going to monitor all namespaces. You can always update this if you wanted to, which I'm going to show you how to do. I installed the operator. I viewed the operator. And so once the operator is installed, you create the instance. So this is what's really important. You create the instance. In this case, my instance is already created. Here's my instance right here. And you can actually view this instance, which is what I want to go through now. And so here's the instance. And so here's what's really important, this step right here. Make sure that you can remove this because this is default. Make sure that you install the correct image. And in this case, I am using the CIS instance that is published on the Red Hat registry and not in the Docker registry. And the reason for that is because it's a trusted source from Red Hat. Red Hat runs a lot of regression against it. We as F5 are a trusted partner, and so therefore that is a trusted container. It's not out on Docker. And so to do that, just change the repo here and change the user credentials. So make sure you just follow with this. And this is the registry here. I'm using the latest. So if you wanted to use a different one, you could use a different version. But make sure you point into this repo at this location. It's really important. What's also really important here, I'm using level debug. This is what creates the route. So by doing that, we'll create the single IP address for all routes. And you can see that if you go to look at the BIG-IP, you can go look at the virtual server. By creating that, it will create these two IP addresses for port 80 and for port 443. So by just creating that IP address there, BIG-IP will create that. I'm using partition of OpenShift. This gets back to the SDN piece. That was that VXLAN tunnel that I talked about. This is CIS is going to communicate with this IP address. That's the BIG-IP URL. In security true, I have a self-signed cert. I'm using cluster IP, so I'm communicating BIG-IP direct to pod. Here is my login. So if you notice, before I created the operator, I I had to create the BIG-IP secrets. So that's really important that you do that. It's up in the step above. So if you wanted to edit that, you would edit it here, right? Through the installed operators, through the instance, you can edit this deployment here. And if you see, I can go down, and here's actually those arguments. So if you make a mistake, you can edit it here. You don't really want to remove the deployment, or you don't want to remove the pod, because the pod is managed by the operator. It's a Helm-based operator that manages this deployment. So you actually need to make the modifications here. So here, these are the arguments that you would actually change. You wouldn't go down to, you wouldn't make changes. Let's drop this down to kube system. You wouldn't make changes in here. You can stop CIS here. It's a great way to stop CIS, but you wouldn't make changes here. You would make changes in the installed operator. That's really important. Or the instance of that. You can have multiple instances as long as they have unique names. When we talk about HA, that's what we're going to do. We're going to create multiple instances of CIS. So with that said, that's the editing of the operator. And you could kind of see that if you wanted to. You can kind of see it in deployments. You can kind of see that your CIS instance is deployed. You can view it, but we talked about that already, not to make changes in there. So that's that piece right there. If you wanted to, you could stop the CIS instance here. That's totally up to you. You can stop it if you want, or you can start it up again. It will just create a new instance of that deployment. And so that's pretty much all that you have to do for the installing the CIS and the network piece. The next piece is just really to create an app. You can do this through the CLI, OC create the app if you want. I'm using the default namespace here, so it doesn't really matter. Or you can create this using OpenShift itself. We can go down to the pods, and let's change to the default namespace where this is. You can kind of see here is my 4 pods that are running based on this deployment. Here's a simple deployment. It's very, very simple. I can edit this deployment if I wanted to. It's just a very, very simple user app. If we wanted to look at this, I did post the repo here, so you could literally just use my app if you want. Here's the deployment. It's a very simple app that was created by the F5 folks. You're welcome to use this. What's really important here is the service. The service we're using type cluster IP on port 80, and this is the name F5 demo. So this is what kind of needs to be in the route, and so that's what references that specific service. So the route will reference the service. That's the specific endpoint that the route's going to be on, and so that's the demo app that I created. You can kind of connect to this demo app. You can see right here, mysite.f5demo.com has to be in DNS. So we can continue connect to this, or if you want, we can open another one. Let's close this out. Open another one here. mysite.f5demo.com. You can see it comes up. So that's just a very simple demo app that is available. That is available to you just in this user guide. The last thing is creating the route. So to create the route, I created an example for you. Let's go take a look at this example route. It's just a very, very, very simple route. You can expand on this route if you wanted to. But what this route is basically doing is it's got a few annotations here. The few annotations is really for health monitoring. This is the host. So it's really important that you address this by host, because it's host header. It's host-based LB, so it makes its decision based on the host. That's why it's so important to have this host in DNS. You can see there is the service F5 demo that we talked about, the target port. So the target port has to match the port that is within the service, so that CIS can address it as an endpoint. And so if you want to see the route, this route should be accepted. We can go down to the network route tab, and you can see that the route is actually accepted there. We can actually click on that route, and it will actually open it up. and connect to the route. And so that's really kind of cool. And that's the service that's there as well. If you wanted to edit this route, you could actually edit the route, and you could edit this route. So it's quite common that folks edit the routes through here. So you'll see once this route is deployed, you can see the API updating the BIG-IP. So that you can do as well. What we can also do here is we can take a look on BIG-IP. We can go to our pool members. We can see this pool that we have 4 members right here. These are the 4 members. So let's go into OpenShift. Let's go to the deployment. And right now there's 4 pods. Let's select this deployment. How about we scale this up to, let's scale this up to 8. And so we scale this up to 8. As you can see, we'll give it there's 8 pods right there. So we can connect to this. So going to BIG-IP, if we refresh this page, it's going to give us all 8. So that's really what's happening. So CIS is monitoring that API. It can detect the auto scale or scaling up, or the replicas changing from 4 to 8. And at that point, we can automatically update BIG-IP with any more of these pods that are created within this OpenShift cluster. So that's actually kind of cool. If you want, you could scale it back down again pretty easily. One thing that is kind of interesting, that's very key here, is the ARPing. So CIS also updates the ARP entries. I want to show this as well. So here is the ARP updates, and you can kind of see it's really cool. You could kind of see that it has learned these MAC addresses and is able to resolve these MACs. This is the BIG-IP. So BIG-IP is able to dynamically ARP over the VXLAN tunnel. So this information is given and is actually plumbed and configured by CIS. So CIS is learning this, updating BIG-IP. But if BIG-IP cannot resolve these, if it says unresolved, you have a tunnel issue. So that's really important to troubleshoot. So let's get back to the user guide. And so this user guide is one of many. So before I get lots of questions, it's one of many. It's using OpenShift 4.7 on VMware for F5 Container Ingress Services for standalone BIG-IP using OpenShift SDN. The next user guide that I'm going to create next is going to be OpenShift 4.7 for standalone SDN for high availability BIG-IP. And then I will get into the OVN Kubernetes coming up in the up and coming days, probably maybe next week or the week after. Thank you very much.